Lakeside Village, the dark map we all know and love or despise, with gloomy skies lit up by the northern lights. It's an interesting location lore-wise, and I feel like not enough people appreciate this fact. IDV lore as a whole is very ignored or misinterpreted by the fandom, especially when it comes to locations that are connected to multiple playable characters, like how White Sand Street Asylum and Arms Factory are. So, to help people learn more about Identity 5 and its world, I decided to make this video going over non-player characters that originate from Lakeside Village, as it's home to some of my favorite NPCs in the game. This video will be divided into four parts. A quick rundown on Lakeside and its history, simple NPCs who don't have much to lore but are notable nonetheless, major NPCs who are much more complex, and theories, speculation, and odd facts that couldn't fit anywhere else. Please take the final section with a grain of salt, as nothing there is 100% confirmed. And with that out of the way, let me begin with my rundown of Lakeside's history. Lakeside Village was always a very secluded area surrounded by the lake and tall mountains, which contained Golden Cave, a topic for another video. It was a relatively quaint village for all it's worth, occasionally bringing in tourists because of its scenery. Though, of course, not all was well, as children and villagers began to go missing. There was a highly religious cult in the village that worshipped a god at the bottom of the lake, who you may know as the Feaster, Haster. They offered them children, whether from villagers or tourists, virgins, and animals, such as livestock, which are all drowned in or thrown into the lake. In exchange for sacrifices, the cultists promised to fulfill villagers' wishes, which were said to have been fulfilled by the Feaster. This behavior is most likely why the village's population began to dwindle, with the population eventually vanishing completely. What exactly happened to them is unknown, as there are two sources with contradicting info on what happened before the population disappeared. In Dreamwitch's first letter, it's noted by an investigator, Chris, that there was a large fire in the village, which the villagers worked hard to put out before they all suddenly went missing. Another source claims that there was a tornado in the village that a survivor brought news of, and that at some point afterwards, the village became a quote unquote place of terror. The tornado is also mentioned in the art book, though only labeled as a strong, cold wind the night before the villagers disappeared. What exactly caused their disappearance is still up for interpretation, but I'll talk more about it towards the end of the video. And that sums up Lakeside Village as a location. Now, onto the actual non-playable residents. Eugene and Marjorie Hayward were an immigrant fishing couple who lived with their niece, Margaretha Zell, who you know as female dancer. They were one of the few people in the village who weren't part of the cult, being skeptical of it. Margaretha eventually began seeing a clown from a circus whose name was Sergei. Eugene told Margaretha that Sergei was a bad person and that she shouldn't talk to him, eventually locking her in at home to keep her from visiting him. Of course, she didn't listen to his warnings and snuck soothing spells at his and Marjorie's dinner one night, causing them to fall asleep and allowing her and Sergei to sneak away. After this, Eugene and Marjorie continued to live peacefully in the village. Eventually, a surveyor named Volker, who we'll talk more about later, came to investigate the village, whom they generously let stay with them in Margaretha's empty bedroom. Eventually, another mass sacrifice is being prepared by the cultists, and Eugene and Marjorie decide to give it a shot, asking for the lake god to let them catch plenty of fish, unlike their recent fishing trips, where they caught very little. The cultists considered their wish ungrateful and blasphemous, and decided to take care of them by sacrificing them, but instead of drowning them like the other sacrifices, they decided to burn them alive instead. And so, they were both burned in the name of the feaster, Haster. Chris is a fairly short and simple character who is only mentioned in Dreamwitch's 2020 letter, which was a letter sent to the priestess Fiona Gilman by a detective she hired named Arthur Russell, who is a topic for another video. Chris is an employee of his, tasked to investigate Lakeside Village on behalf of Fiona after Arthur's previous employee, Volker Berglund, went missing. Chris eventually found Volker's luggage completely abandoned. He noted that there were no villagers in sight and that there had apparently been a fire on September 26th. According to the police, the villagers had extinguished the fire, but they had never been seen ever since. He investigated the field where the fire had been, finding that it was part of a sacrificial event. Amidst the ash, he discovered unnaturally large scales. which he assumed meant that there had been animal sacrifices here. He also noticed that the river seemed to have been contaminated due to the surrounding plants wilting, though the contaminant was never found. While there, Chris investigated two things that Volker reported as being interesting: a shadow in the lake that appeared when things are sacrificed, and a mysterious cave nearby. He wasn't able to see the lake shadow when he threw stuff into the water, and he deemed the cave to be ordinary, ending his and Fiona's investigation. Thompson was a biology researcher who worked with Professor Lucina de Ruse. He originally wanted to start a matchmaking business, yes, the romantic kind, but that plan was eventually foiled, which is when he turned to research with Lucino at a university most likely located near Lakeside Village based on the fact that Lucino's large scales are found in a nearby forest. Eventually, a janitor at a laboratory, Darren Berglund, found a mysterious snake-like creature that had four legs outside of his mother's window. Thompson took great interest in this creature and offered it to Lucino to do experiments on. Lucino was hesitant, but he couldn't pass up on the opportunity to investigate a possibly new species. We all know how that went, with him letting it bite him, causing it to turn into a lizard. Thompson ceases to be mentioned in any letters from this point on, though in Dream Witch's 2022 letter, it's mentioned that a laboratory was contacted to conduct an environmental investigation on Lakeside Village's water and soil. There's no name attached to the laboratory, but it's possible it was Thompson's, since, unlike Lucino, he was only stated as being a biologist, not a herpetologist. So investigating the algae and mysterious microbes out in the water and soil is something in his realm of expertise. Don't take this as a complete fact, though, as this is mostly speculation as I'm making this video, but it's something to think about. And that's about it for the minor non-player characters in Lakeside. Even the more simple characters like these have a lot of thought put into them, with stories that are far from simple as you'd expect. Now, onto the more complex characters, who are the main reasons I decided to make this video in the first place. Volker and Zarin Berglund are two brothers who are heavily tied to Lakeside. As characters, they both seem to act like foils of one another. Volker was a realist and skeptic who still held a deep interest in the supernatural, while his brother Darren seemed to be much more reserved, superstitious, and hard set in his beliefs, noting that he thinks it's silly of Luciano to think humans came from monkeys and that the lizard he found was possessed by a demon. Their mother was gravely ill, seeming to need frequent medical treatments. Despite this, Volker was deeply intrigued by his father's research into dreams, talking about one specific dream he's had multiple times about going down a staircase into a cave of fire. He believes the secret his father was searching for was somewhere in that dream cave, which is why he was so determined to enter it. In the midst of his research, Arthur Russell employed him to be a surveyor at Lakeside Village for his client Fiona Gilman. From here on out, Volker and Zarin, who worked as a janitor at Thompson's lab, spoke to each other exclusively through letters sent to one another. Volker set off for Lakeside Village, finding a place to stay with Eugene and Marjorie Hayward, who were the only foreigners in the village and the only people kind enough to house him. From his research, he discovered the cult of the village and the custom of throwing meat into the lake. When a large shadow appeared to take it, the villagers would call out their wishes. As a skeptic, he simply believed the shadow in question was a bunch of piranhas, and the so-called wish granting was a scam. Further into his stay, he discovered the existence of a cave up north that was guarded by yellow-robed cultists, who were called disciples. Eventually, he was able to question one, telling him that their religion is all about spreading the will of the lake god and to practice his loving principles. Afterwards, he asked some villagers about the ritual, where he found out that after the sacrifice, the disciples take the offering's remains up to a sanctuary up north. None of the villagers know what happens in this stage. So, Volker was determined to investigate this when the next sacrifice happened, which was in 5 days. Unbeknownst to him, the disciples deemed him disrespectful and blasphemous towards their god, so they wished to sacrifice him via burning, just like Eugene and Marjorie. From this point on, Arthur Russell stopped getting reports from Volker, and Darren ceased to receive letters from him, never receiving any responses. Darren was devastated, as his mother's condition worsened, noting that she wanted to see her son Volker one last time. It's most likely that Volker died during this sacrifice. Due to Volker's sudden disappearance, Arthur Russell began an investigation into his family. Darren continued to work at the lab with Thompson and Lucino, where he turned in the four-legged lizard he found by his bedridden mother's window. Sometime after this, however, both Darren and Lucino went missing, with Russell's team finding out the scales found in the lab were the same as the ones found in Lakeside Village. Considering the danger surrounding the village, Russell decided to halt all investigation into it to ensure his employees' safety, and refunded any payments for the investigation made by Fiona. The Berglund family is deeply tragic, and considering all the things we still don't know about them, like their father's research into dreams, I'm sure we'll hear about them again in due time. Arthur Byers, one of the most notable non-player characters, not to be confused with the detective Arthur Russell. When he was a toddler, he was found a mile away from Lakeside Village with strange drawings littered on the ground leading up to where he was. When discovered, he was delirious and soaking wet from head to toe and refused to answer any questions about his past, instead demanding somewhere dark and damp to stay. Whatever happened to him, which was most likely a sacrifice to Haster that he hadn't survived, left him deeply traumatized and ill, as he was observed writhing around and drenching rocks in animal blood. He was eventually given treatment, which helped a lot in stabilizing him, though he still refused to recall his past. When he was older, he eventually wrote a book called Lakeside Trails about his past in the village and the sacrifices he performed. Aside from being an author, he was also a senator, running for Senate in a town called Southwark. Eventually, he was invited to Elitis Manor to participate in a manor game with the promise of more information on his childhood and what exactly happened to him. He accepted the invite and joined Game 6A with Fiona Gilman and Lucino DeRuse, with three other currently unknown participants. Arthur expresses regret for joining due to his emotion driven decision of wanting to know more about his past, with the game so close to his senator election, and claims that four of the participants are vessels of monsters, which are most likely other gods. In the Manor game, it's unclear what exactly he did, but Fiona held great interest in him, and in turn, he quote unquote sacrificed her, yet this didn't kill her. Due to the group's tampering with the gods, everyone was turned into puddles of the lake's water and practically wiped from existence, with Lucino being the only one spared due to him curbing his own curiosity. The reason I left Arthur Byers for last is because, despite how short his story may seem compared to the Berglund brothers, he holds great importance to his manor game, and there's a very high chance he'll become playable at some point in the future. We went a long time only knowing him as code 05L01000, which was brought up in Haster's 2022 letter that I had no clue how to fit into this, until 2023, when we suddenly got confirmation about his real name and occupation in a span of 3 months. What piqued my curiosity most is the fact that he was mentioned in the Ashes of Memory trailer. What would a character like him be doing here if he wasn't important in some way, especially one we know was in a manor game? I look forward to learning more about Arthur Byers, as it seems NetEase has a grand story planned for him. And that sums up just about everything there is to know about the non-playable characters in Lakeside Village. Though that's not where this video ends, as there's plenty of interesting speculation to be had about the village. One of the more popular theories is about the Lakeside short story from the art book about a strong cold wind cutting through the village right before the villagers disappeared, with only one hunter remaining. People have theorized this may have been caused by the new hunter, Ithaqua, since he lives in a reserved snowy area and has wind powers. Lakeside is heavily connected to the gods, and since Ithaqua is an actual Lovecraftian god like Hastur and Yidra, it's very much possible that God Ithaqua had something to do with this incident, since he's known for having control over wind, like how our playable Night Watch does. And plus, there's the snowy mountains right next to Lakeside Village. This isn't confirmed, it's just a theory, so please take it with a grain of salt. It's nothing more than food for thought. And for more food for thought, everybody believes Naiad is connected to Lakeside. There is no confirmation for this whatsoever beyond people's speculation, as it's only noted she was raised in a fishing village. If she really was at Lakeside, then her story must have taken place years ago, possibly over a century ago. Now, I'm not saying it can be true, just try not to treat it like a fact just yet, as it's only speculation, as I said earlier. Earlier, I mentioned Haster's 2022 letter being something so odd that I couldn't fit it into Byers' section. I'm still not sure where exactly to talk about it, but here is better than anywhere else. His 2022 letter is about an interview for a preliminary experiment, with the document written in a format we've never seen before. The interviewer is not mentioned, and everybody is simply referred to as a code, with Byers being 05L01000. There are two other mystery people mentioned, referred to as 014 and 072. Who these people are, why they're being interviewed, and what the numbers mean is completely unknown as I'm making up this video. Is this preliminary group associated with the manor? What is the goal of this group? What kind of experiment is taking place? There's just so many questions we have yet to get answers to. The letter's biggest contribution is telling us about Byers' childhood, though I'm sure it'll become more relevant in time. Thank you all so very much for watching. It really means a lot. This is my first time making a video like this, from scripting to recording to editing, so I hope I did alright. Any support and feedback would be greatly appreciated. I hope you learned something new or finally figured everything out. IDV lore is very complex, so I hope for this to be a resource for people interested in it, both new and old. And once again, thank you for staying with me until the end, and I'll hopefully see you again in the future.